also to the people who are connecting and following us online. Let me introduce myself. My name is Maria José Canel. I am professor in political and public sector communication at the University Complutense in Madrid. And the reason why I am here while I will be conducting this event is because I have had the opportunity of witnessing what has been the evolution of Etorkizuneraikis, which is the government program that brings us together today. A few words about the topic. The event is based on this Etorkizuneraikis program. It is a government program that aims at enhancing democracy by bringing together people, society, and bringing them to the core of policymaking. It is 150 projects, 12 reference centers already built and working, more than 900 organizations that have been and are involved in this project, about 50,000 beneficiaries of this program. Together with more than 20 scholars, both practitioners and scholars have been analyzing this project for several months, and they have brought some academic lessons about what this project tells us about how to build democratic resilience. The book is free open access, and it has been published by KU Leuven University Press. The digital version is already out, and the print version will be out soon. The book is titled Building Collaborative Governance in Times of Uncertainty. And when we were interacting with some of the institutions that are here today about this event, we realized that a common and core concern that is there is building democratic resilience. So we decided to name this event today Collaborative Governance to Handle Democratic Uncertainty, the model of Gipuzkoa. Of course, we will be talking about the book, and you will see that those people that come from the Diputación Foral de Gipuzkoa, which is the institution that has undertaken this project, they will be speaking in a sort of celebration mode, because you will sense that they have a feeling of having achieved something from which to share with others and see what can be learned about it. Of course, we will be talking about the book, about the project, but the way we wanted to celebrate this and to have this event today, to launch this book, was not so much talking about the book, but inviting and having together here those people and institutions who share this concern and want to talk about how to build democracy, how to bring society to the core of policymaking, how to build democratic resilience. Thanks to the institutions that are here today, the European Commission, the European Parliament, OECD. Thanks to participants, to the speakers that we will have today, for having accepted this invitation to share with us their ideas and concerns. Thanks to the delegation of the Basque Country to the European Union, particularly to Marta Marin and her team, for arranging this event and for hosting us. Thanks, of course, for KU Leuven University Press for being so easy and helpful in producing this volume. And of course, I really want to thank to Etorkizuneraikis for providing us with such a case with a high learning potential. What will we do this morning is, first, I will pass the floor to the President General Deputy of the the Gipuzkoa Provincial Council, then a video message from the Vice President of the European Commission, Mrs. Dubravka Suica, for Democracy and Demography. Then we will have a keynote speech and then 2 round tables, one on the why, collaborative governance, and the second on the how can we implement it. So let me start by introducing you Markel Olano. Markel Olano is President General Deputy of the Gipuzkoa Provincial Council. I will share with you that his profile is not the typical profile of a politician. He is, yes, a politician, but he is a philosopher. And I have to say also that he is a Gipuzkoa lover. He loves Gipuzkoa, the territory, for which he has been determined for many years to address its challenges, to address the challenges that the territory faces when building democracy. Markel Olano, thank you.
Egun on guztioi. Good morning, everybody. Perhaps I could start by expressing my appreciation for the kind introduction by Maria José Canel. Thank you, Maria José. And my thanks for the invitation, especially to the Basque government and the Basque Country EU representatives for making this encounter possible. For those unfamiliar with Gipuzkoa, permit me a brief description of the territory. It has certain features to be taken into account, which are necessary for an understanding of etorkizunarekin, building the future in English. Gipuzkoa is one of 3 territories of the Basque Country, and it is the smallest province in the Spanish state. It has a dense population and a flourishing economy. Gipuzkoa's economy is based on an industrial powerhouse that accounts for more than 25% of its GDP and solid investment in R&D, 2.69% of GDP, outstripping the European average. The economic fabric is mostly made up of SMEs, which have nevertheless ventured out into the world and now operate on the international market. This economic wealth, creating one of the state's highest per capita incomes, goes hand in hand with a low percentage of inequality, on a par with leading European nations. This is primarily thanks to a widespread solid social protection system based on a public-private collaboration model. This combination of a competitive economy and a social justice, it is what we call the Gipuzkoa model, our successful local setup, which fills us with pride. We could highlight some additional characteristics. The fact that we have our own taxation systems helping drive economic promotion and taking action to redistribute wealth. A leading international social economy, and for example, we have the world's largest industrial cooperative group, Mondragon, and a long tradition of collaboration among a range of players and a networking trend. All this is rounded off by our own language, Basque, and a solid national and Basque idiosyncrasy in Gipuzkoa. We can therefore say that building the future arose from fertile soil, or at least that our territory boasted some major forts from the get-go. Gipuzkoa, however, was not and is not indifferent to a number of challenges that jeopardized and continue to jeopardize the continuity of its social and economic model. Building the Future was presented to society in 2000 of a resurgence of populism and extremist ideologies. Our view of the situation at that time was that although there were no magic recipes or formulas, we had to do something different to turn the situation around. Carrying on with old politics or simply avoiding the issue, or even worse, accepting it for what it was, could only exacerbate a situation which was already giving cause for concern. The threat was, and still is, such that it may eventually jeopardize the future of the democratic system governing modern societies as we know them. And so in 2016, we decided that Gipuzkoa was not prepared to simply look on as our political and institutional system increasingly progressed to rack and ruin. The focus on a new political culture based on collaboration among all kinds of stakeholders is, therefore, the basis of the proposal that was tabled and continues to be tabled by Building the Future. Renovate or die. Building the Future proposes participation and involvement in politics as a method to shun extremism and build bridges with an organized society and citizens who, in general, appear to view the political class and public authorities with distrust. When it emerged officially in society in 2016, Building the Future was presented as a tool to maximize and get the very best of our territory's innovation potential in order to address future challenges. Presentation of the project initially lined up with universities, throwing down the gauntlet to citizenry and organized society. It was a call to experiment, reflect, debate, and produce common solutions to problems which affect each and every one of us as a whole, but which, in most cases, also affect the personal life of each and every individual. It was an attempt to offer citizens something new, a positive call to get involved in a new space of trust, a space in which their contributions are taken into account and are used to address those enormous challenges our territory faced and continues to face. Much water has gone under the bridge since then, and the world has changed. We suffered a world pandemic which succeeded in shutting down almost everything. War broke out almost in the heart of Europe, and uncertainty is the word most frequently uttered when we discuss economic issues and, in a broad perspective, with respect to the future of each individual. Today, we are talking about soaring prices and inflation. Yesterday, we were concerned with issues such as fuel prices of a dearth of industrial components. Tomorrow, in which we move around are changing, and certainties are disappearing, and doubt lurks around all aspects of our lives. Life in the 20th century, based on stable employment and stable sentimental relationships, a stable family unit, and a pathway virtually stabilized to move through the various phases of life has been blown to smithereens. New generations face a path which branches out in many directions. What will I work as? How long can I stay in this job? Will I be able to afford a flat? Will we have enough to retire on? In the course of Building the Future, and Building the Future's first 6 years, the project has attempted to come up with answers for such complex questions as the above. And to this end, it has established a collaborative exercise of reflection, idea pooling, and proposals of solutions. This task has involved over 1,500 businesses, associations, knowledge agents, and all kinds of organizations. More than 68,000 people have been involved in the project to a greater or lesser extent. From the quantitative perspective, Building the Future has succeeded in establishing and launching 12 strategies and reference centers in areas considered vitally important to the future of the territory. New mobility, the fight against climate change, or population aging, for instance. These lines of action seek to furnish a response to the major challenges that face the territory in the years ahead, in a bid to turn the threat into an opportunity and boost Gipuzkoa's level of specialization in such issues. We believe that these future sectors may constitute the cornerstones of the future economy. In addition, Building the Future now operates 46 experimental projects involving all kinds of stakeholders in order to test drive and arrive of solutions to complex issues in real-life environments, such as new care models for the elderly, or experimentation on matters such as professional family balance and intergenerational relationship. Organized society, meanwhile, receives an annual invitation to freely present innovative and experimental proposals to address the issues of the future. Today, Building the Future has helped finance 150 such experiments. In addition, we have opened up channels of participation for citizens, the citizens' assemblies, which we are carrying out in collaboration with the OECD. These are experimental processes of deliberative democracy organized by the public administration, and participants are selected by the drawing of lots. The main goal is to get them involved in the search for solutions to future challenges that have complex answers. We have already done 2 of those experiences, one in the town of Tolosa and the other one in all Gipuzkoa. Additionally, Etorkizunarekin, Building the Future, has opened up to the world through its internationalization dynamics, and today's event forms part of this line of action. It operates direct channels for communication with and participation by citizens on a constant basis, open budgets, cross-border budgets, interactive participation processes, etc. It has also consolidated a powerful think tank to act as a space for reflection and debate on the direction which Gipuzkoa ought to take, and also to pinpoint threats and table solutions for the problems facing the territory. In a word, Building the Future has risen up as a call for action to be taken in an increasingly changing, diverse world. An exercise seeking to grasp the tiller and sail our own course through currents that threaten to drag us towards the unknown. Building the Future seeks to move on from words to actions, offering the ideal space for participation and experimentation to build the Gipuzkoa of the future. A space open to one and all, where the watchwords are collaboration and teamwork. A space which, on the basis of action, is succeeding in overcoming distrust and narrowing the gap between politics and citizens. We do not love that we do not know, and it is difficult to defend something which we do not love. And so, by opening wide the windows of participation to local citizens and involving them in the search for solutions, we increase their level of knowledge of public authorities and politics, and directly make them part and parcel of our joint effort to address the major future challenges facing our territory. And this, in the medium-long term, entails greater trust and reduction in the displacement of citizens. In the medium and long term, it signifies the bolstering of our democratic system. Thank you very much.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. Sharing lessons learned and exchanging on best practices is key in making our democracy more vibrant and more resistant. This event contributes to this goal by bringing together experts and practitioners in building democratic resilience. It is so important to talk about the structures of collaborative governance and the models of development of collaborative leadership. In exchanges today, you will also address how to move from experimentation to institutionalization, as well as reflect on the assessment of outcomes, which is the needed ingredient of success. Through this work, you are helping us write a new chapter for democracy and citizen participation in the European Union. By showcasing this successful example, you are allowing all of us in the European Union to learn from a model that works. Democracy thrives on citizens' ability to contribute to and participate in their democracy at all levels, from the local to the regional, from the national to the European Union level. Citizen participation is not limited to the ballot box. Democracy is also what happens between elections. As part of a deliberative wave, governments and parliaments at all levels are involving citizens more frequently in participatory policy making. It is in this context that the European Commission is also doing our part. I say this based on my own experience as co-chair of the Conference on the Future of Europe. We took the proposals of the conference seriously, and it has led us to change the way in which we work. For example, in the Commission's work program for this year, 80% of the new initiatives announced are inspired by and follow up on this successful experience in deliberative democracy. Also, for the first time anywhere in the world, for an executive body, we have embedded deliberative democracy in our policy making. We are doing this by launching a new generation of European citizen panels. Regions and cities across the European Union have been at the forefront of experimenting with innovative forms of citizen engagement. Today, deliberative democracy exercises are happening in over 1,300 municipalities. We must encourage and support them. This is why I am so excited about the work you are doing here today, because you are also inviting us to go beyond the deliberative practices and become truly collaborative in policy making. You are working on bringing citizens to the core of policymaking and suggesting we need to go beyond deliberation. I share the view that designing and implementation of collaborative governance, when done correctly, can be incredibly powerful. As you know, the Commission already supports Member States to make their democracies more participatory. In 2020, we committed to build a deliberative infrastructure in the Member States. Our focus is on capacity building, structural funds, and research programs. By engaging with citizens, we are building democratic resilience from within. Taking the step toward more collaborative governance is a motivating model to explore also in other cities, regions, and nations. Before we get there, we are revising European Democracy Action Plan in light of a new Defence of Democracy package. A key pillar will be a legislative proposal to protect the Union's democratic sphere from covert foreign hostile interference. The package will also contain measures on inclusive democratic participation and civic engagement. This includes civil society organizations and citizens. In a democracy, our greatest asset is our citizens. Across all generations, that is why the European Commission has taken steps to focus on democratic innovation, to strengthen our democratic ecosystem. And your work here can be an inspiration. Ladies and gentlemen, we can never take our democracy for granted. Thank you for all your work in making it much more innovative, vibrant, and resilient. And I wish you excellent exchanges today. Thank you.
Okay, so many good things have happened to Turkish Sunaraikis along its life. And one of them is undoubtedly to have met Professor Gert Burkhardt, to whom I am going to introduce now. Gert Burkhardt is professor at the KU Leuven Public Governance Institute, Leuven in Belgium. He's honorary professor at the Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose, University College London, and visiting professor at the University of Potsdam. Well, Gert is many things, and from all of them, I will point out that he's mad about contemporary art. And when he met Turkish Sunaraikis in the year 2017, he looked at this program with an artist view, I would say, and thought that a lot could come from it. And for Turkish Sunaraikis, Gert has been an inspirer, an encourager, a driver, and certainly it's one of its best ambassadors. But most of all, Gert Burkhardt is a giant colleague and friend, and it has been great to be with him in this project. He is one of the editors, together with Xavier Barandiaran and myself, the editors of this volume. Thanks, Gert, for being here with us, giving this keynote speech.
We're having the PowerPoint, yes, thank you. Good morning, everybody, excellencies, and dear colleagues, dear friends. Collaborative governance for building the future, Turkish Sunaraikis, within the European Union, of course. Maria Jose already mentioned it. I'm very proud we could get the Chirida family to agree to have this statute. The title of the statute is Embrace. And so I think it really wraps up the whole book to say, you know, a collaborative governance is about embracing citizens, society, the public sphere. It's a whole of society, whole of government image, which I think I want to emphasize. But we're not here to talk about art. I don't know if that is very visible, but this is a crucial slide from a publication from the European Parliament Research Service. And on the left side, you see risks, and one of them is the growing democratic fragility. And to the right, you see policy responses, possible policy responses, and some are on consolidating strategic topics and ties with democracy and building a healthier online environment for healthy democracies. And I think that refers to what the Vice President just said. And if we continue this, that's from the same study on impacts and probability, it is quite clear that democracy risk is high on the agenda. And the crucial response then is, or the crucial questions we need to ask is that we need a paradigm change to tackle these risks. And the policy response should be a paradigm change. And so the questions we need to ask, and if we don't ask them, they will come to us anyway, is our democratic public governance regime capable to solve, quote unquote, to handle, quote unquote, to contain, quote unquote, all these shocks in general, but the democracy one in particular? And don't we need a reflection on what is fit for purpose for the future? What is fit for purpose for an effective public governance regime which is democratic and which is a part of the rule of law thinking? Unfortunately, even in Europe, we have to ask this question very explicitly. And how do we build the future, which is the Turkesuna Eraikis? How do we build it for the future, this democratic and effective governance within the European Union? And that requests a change of paradigm, which it takes time for paradigms to change. It seems to be blocked. The paradigm change is coming. Ladies and gentlemen, yes, there we are. It shows actually we have to be not just patient, but courageous and insistent to build this paradigm change. I think that's a very crucial, it's a very demanding thing to do. And we have to do it together, so I couldn't do it without the support services in the back office. I think the major paradigm change, which we have to think for the future of our systems, is that we have to think, we used to think as, we have normal operations, we have a crisis, we contain the crisis, we try to solve this crisis, and then we go back to new normal. It becomes like a fashion word, new normal, because it's not the old normal. And so this sequential thinking, we have to get rid of this. I think we have to change it to have a kind of parallel, simultaneously combining the service delivery and the standard operating procedures and the policies simultaneously combined with recurrent crisis governance. And that's a totally different paradigm, which impacts the way we have to organize our whole of society and our whole of government. And that's actually what we are talking about here. Because ultimately, it's about implications for the whole public space. We can call it the state, we can talk to the government, public service, but it's changing the way we have to think in whole of society and whole of government things, because it's about changing decision-making. And as the Vice President said, it's not just democracy as elections, but it's also what happens between elections, really. And we have to do that to keep legitimacy. We have to change the dynamics to define the content of our policies. And that's really to keep the trustworthiness of our systems. That's crucial. And we have to change the public governance regimes. And actually, the purpose of this talk is also to convince you that it's about collaborative governance. This is not new, of course. We have a history of that. Luckily, there is a part dependency of it. And I hope, yes. And so, and this is a too short summary scientifically. I would have to come back to repeat this here. But it's about engaging society. How do we organize engaging society? And the history is, the 70s up to the 90s, and it differs from country to country in a way. From the politics point of view, it's a bit different, but it's related to the governance point of view of these policies. It's about consultation, and you see it reflected in the public sphere and the whole of government dimensions on, getting citizens involved with customer surveys. Initially, it was a bit limited. But we moved from the political point of view to interaction and participation. The word came more prominent. And we see it in the governance agenda, in the citizens' charters and the evaluations, which were quite important. But that moved on to, in the 2000s, and as I said, it differs from country to country here, citizens' initiatives. And on the governance side, it was really about co-production and co-creation. And now we are really the 2010s coming up, and the next decades. It's about deliberative democracy, but it's certainly about collaborative governance. And that's actually the point, to say deliberative democracy is necessary, but probably not sufficient. And we have to complement it with collaborative governance. And the question is not what is part of what, it depends on definitions here, but the logic and the philosophy is actually very coherent. And how does this logic look like? It's like this here. We moved from a closed system, so to speak, I'm putting this a bit black and white, a closed system where you have the policy design, the decisions, the implementation, the evaluation, which is actually in the black box and which is with the politics and the civil service. And that's very good. And we should do that very good and professional, of course. But we actually have expanded this, and now the box is opened. The black box is not the black box anymore, and we have to involve citizens and society. Society as an organization of organized citizens. It can be for profit, it can be not for profit, it can be local government initiatives, and that's a crucial point. And so it's about citizens and society that have an impact on policy design, on decision, on implementation, and on evaluation. It's the co-design, the co-decide, the co-implement, the co-evaluate. Sometimes I call it co-co-co-co. It's the song which we need, actually. Co-co-co-co is the song of collaborative governance and deliberate democracy, really. And the question is, how do we organize that? Because it's not so easy. It's jumping here, yes. So decision-making is changing. And we see pressures from two sides, really. There is a positive pressure somewhere. There is participation and partnerships for investments, co-production. We see all kinds of synergies there. Yes, we see volunteers and civic cultures, and we see citizen engagement and all kinds of organizations. However, and unfortunately, we should not be naive. There is a lot of negative pressure too. We see alternative truths. We see interference in elections. I think it's a major concern of the Commission, rightly so. We see decreased political leadership, unfortunately, with populism. We see direct political communication with Twitter democracy and Twitter decision-making, fragmentations, compromise in that. I don't want to depress you, but there is actually a positive agenda, too, of collaboration here. And it's also about the contents of policies. And the contents of policies are crucial too. Again, it's a difficult thing to shift contents of policies. I hope it's popping up. Yes, there we are. contents of policies, the positive drives. Yes, we have integrated the Sustainable Development Goals, also in the Commission. Yes, we see actually that local problems and global issues are being connected. However, we also have to admit that savings have resulted in subcritical capacity in the public sector. We see that there is a feeling of abandonment. People feel abandoned, major parts of the population. We have to get them back, really. We see different types of nationalism and regionalism globally, different types of globalism. And the blaming is coming back. That's very, it's not just it's the economy stupid, now it's the ecology stupid, it's the social stupid, it's the migrants stupid. So we have to be very careful for the blaming strategies here and develop a positive one. So citizens are crucial, but citizens are also get too many questions. They have their complex lives. So the question is, what is the willingness of citizens to be involved? Because we can have wishful thinking here, but we should be realistic here too. And I'll show you two slides, which are, it's an old study from my colleague Loeffler. That's a major survey within Europe, more than 3,000 respondents. Yes, citizens are willing to contribute. Yes, they are. And this is about contributing to certain policy fields here. I mean, I'm just summarizing that only 30% says they are not willing to participate. There is a trend there too. And the more recent graph is from the Netherlands, from the Social Cultural Planning Bureau 2021. This is like, volunteers, people that are willing to volunteer in society for different policy fields. And I'm not going through that, it's in Dutch. It's about different socioeconomic elements here. And you see, yes, it's about 1/3, 40%, sometimes 50% of citizens that are willing to volunteer and to contribute here. So that's an important element. So engaging citizens, yes, that's certainly necessary, but that's not sufficient. We need actually also new political leadership, new public, I should call it public leadership, because public leadership is new political leadership, new administrative leadership, and new citizen leadership. And that's in civil society, and that's the organized part in which the case we are discussing is very important. To conclude, 3 levels of collaborative governance. Macro, that's really the institutional part. Meso, that's actually more on the policy side. And micro, it's on the organizational side. And that's also chapter 8 of the book, which obviously you will read, and which gives, actually from the case of Eturkesana Araikes, we try to surface mechanisms which we think will allow to export actually the model. We cannot export the Basque Country, but we can export the mechanisms that have been used to make it a successful story, not just a single project, which is like common in our scientific world, but it's like consolidated and integrated. So the macro part is about really to have a history and a shared vision of political and societal actors together. It's about institutionalizing. It's important. So it's not a one-shot thing. It should be institutionalized. And it's not just about better results, efficiency and effectiveness. Who is against efficiency and effectiveness? Nobody? Okay. It's also about appropriateness. Appropriate government is needed in an appropriate way in interacting with society. And the macro part is about the rule of law driven by a democratic state. That's what we need. And obviously with the market and the networks. The meso level is also crucial because that's about dialogue, to mobilize local knowledge. Dialogue is a crucial element. And it's about involving local universities. It's about involving societal actors in the cycle which I draw. The sooner the better, but in all stages. It's about different levels of government. It's about leadership. which is accountable. And finally, the micro level is at the organizational level. Crucial words are listening and learning. Listening and learning are crucial. And it's about a civil service that is changing its culture to allow empowered stakeholders. I mean, I will repeat it because these words are so important, I think. It's about a changed culture and therefore practice of the civil service, the whole of government, to allow empowered stakeholders. And I think that's a crucial element of this collaborative governance here. So it's about communication is crucial. We have to walk the talk. That's actually the crucial message. We have to embrace a whole of society and a whole of government for deliberative democracy with collaborative governance. And ultimately, this exercise is a European exercise where we all have to walk the talk. Thank you very much.
Keynote and the deliberation that we heard before, I call for the first panel. I am Marta Marin. I am the delegate of the Basque Country to the European Union and the moderator of this panel on why the collaborative governance is important. So I call Thomas Sutik. Please, you can be on the floor. We have Philippe Schulmeister, because Mr. Jaume Duc cannot be with us today, but Philippe is replacing Jaume Duc. We have Mr. Adil Najam, please come to the floor. Yes, we have Maria Jose Canel with 2 hats today, from moderator to panelist. And Xavier Barandiaran, please come to the panel. I think that you need to be with a micro, so I will introduce you whilst you are, putting the micro on. So Thomas Sutik is the member of the cabinet of the European Commission Vice President Dubravka Šuica, charged with demography and democracy. Mr. Sutik has been deeply involved with deliberative and participatory processes through his work during the Conference on the Future of Europe and its follow-up. And he has been as well has a rich experience in the private sector and a rich experience with civil society organizations, in particular in European rural areas. Mr. Philippe Schulmeister, he is director for campaigns and the head of the public opinion monitoring unit in the European Parliament. He has been responsible for the last 5 years for the Eurobarometer surveys. So I think that you have a lot to say as well on this topic. Mr. Adil Najam, he is Dean Emeritus and Professor at the Frederick Sampardi School of Global Studies at Boston University in the United States. And he's a specialist on international relations and climate change, among others. Mrs. Maria Jose Canel, you are the professor of political and public communication at the Complutense University of Madrid, and as well conductor and editor of the book we are talking about today. And last but not least, Xavier Barandiaran. He is councillor at the Gipuzkoa Provincial Council. He is one of the fathers of the Etorkizuna Iraikiz, and the practitioner on the ground of this Building the Future program in Gipuzkoa. So I will sit here among you. And my first question, well, the question is self-explanatory, why collaborative governance is important, but I will start by asking you why this is important and what are the drivers in your organization. I will start by Mr. Adil. At international level, why do you think that collaborative governance is important from the point of view of international relations?
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you also for having me, and congratulations to everyone, Michael, to you and all your colleagues for not just the book, but for what's behind the book, for the experiment, as you put it. In many ways, the way to answer your question is everything that Gert just said. So I'm just going to repeat what he said, but I'll be less polite than he was. I think, as has been mentioned more politely than I will say it, democracy has a problem. The problem is not in democracy. The problem is of democracy in the sense, you also use the word, and I use it in my little contribution to the book, that more and more people are questioning whether our institutions and tools of democracy are fit for purpose. This is different from other ways in which democracy is questioned. When someone questions democracy, that's not the question. The question today is not that people don't want democracy. The question is that people are saying, are we getting the democracy we want? Right? And you can see that on your Twitter feed. You can see that in Germany. You can see that in France. You can see that in the UK. You can see that in the country where I work, the United States. You can see that in the country where I was born, Pakistan. You can see that in India. You can see that in Hong Kong with young people. If you think about the images that cross whether it's your newspaper or your television or your feed, a lot of those images, and we should be thinking about this, a lot of those images are about people wanting something more, not just from government, but from institutions of democracy. And what is important is a lot of those images are about young people. Right? So if someone was to take a collage of all the Instagram political feed and turn it into one picture, it will be a picture of a world where a lot of young people are out on the street. Right? It's Greta with climate. It's Extinction Rebellion. It's Hong Kong and umbrellas. It is Chile. It is Jordan. Right? And so the question is, what is that, and where does collaborative government fit? Again, to lead on from what is in the book and what you just presented, in some ways, my sense is that this is good news. People are demanding more from democracy because it is not a rebellion against democracy, it is the evolution of democracy. Right? So we come to democracy as representation. And when you are interested in representation, what do you talk about? You talk about the vote. Right? I'm from Pakistan, much more primitive democracy. We are still asking for the vote. Right? So the first step is you say, I want to vote. Why do I want to vote? Because I want representation. But once you get representation, then you want something more from democracy. Now it is not just vote that you want voice. Right? And in the 90s and the 2000s, we saw more and more demand for voice, which for me means I want a say in the policy, not just in who is in government. Right? And voice was really not primarily, but a large part of it was about marginalized groups, about interest groups, those who thought that representation alone would not give me voice, so I bring voice. I think what is happening now, and sorry for the longish answer, but this is the answer to your question for me. I think in the evolution of democracy, the next step after you have vote, after you have voice, is engagement. It is not enough for me just to have the vote, especially for young people. It is not enough for me just to have voice, to be able to somehow, get a form to fill or a survey to do or someone to interview me. I want to get my hands dirty. I want to be in your think tank, right? And if you don't have the think tank, I'll be on the streets. Now, I don't know if the think tank is the answer to being on the street, but I think it is one step towards a possible answer, right? So all these images that I was talking about in the street is people saying, I want to get my hands dirty. One last thought on this, just by way of maybe evidence. I ask my students and my audiences very often, how often between elections in your country? Some people say 4 years, some people say 5 years. In Pakistan, they say no one knows, and so on and so forth. And I said, no, that's no longer true. We have in every country today elections every day. It happens on Twitter, right? Mr. Trump was the master of it, but now everyone is a master of it. In the morning, something goes out on tweet, and all day the apparatus of government is now trying to respond to that. Right? This is a fundamental governance challenge. 4 years was already too short to do anything meaningful. But if you're going to respond to governance in 24 hours, it's going to become more difficult. Right? That is the other reason for collaborative. So either we create collaborative spaces which allow engagement, as you just described, or we will force people to create their own collaborative spaces out on the street. We will force people to create their collaborative space on social media. We will force people to create that space with noise, right? So in this sense, I don't think what you have done is simply a polite little experiment. In many ways, I think it is ideas like this, it is experiments like this, that everywhere in the world we need to think about on how to deal with this evolution of democracy, as I call it.
Thank you, Adil. So, yeah, I will change a little bit. I will shift. So, Philip, well, we are at the term of this mandate in the European Parliament. Why do you think collaborative governance is important for the European Parliament?
Well, thank you. It's very difficult to add anything meaningful after your keynote speech and that what you have said, but I will try nevertheless. Let me start with your first question, maybe that you had: is democracy still fit for purpose? I would rephrase this a little bit. Maybe one small step before sideways. Is not the main question for many people: where am I in this? Where do I see myself not only represented by someone, but really represented ad personam, with what I want, with what I care for in this democratic process? As you said in your kind introduction, I've been dealing with Eurobarometer surveys now for the past 5 years. There is a few interesting indicators that I would maybe like to pick up on. On the one hand, we have, since, let's say, the 2010s, the big economic and financial crisis, a more or less continuous increase in image, role, appreciation of the benefit of the European Union in people's minds. Up to 70% today say, I have benefited from that. On the other hand, I have more or less a 50-50 split where people say my voice counts in the European Union. 50% says I'm satisfied with the way democracy is working in the European Union. Still slightly at a higher level, at least in the Eurobarometer data, than we would have it for the national level. But still, it is a clear indication also for us. And then when we come now, as you said, to the next European elections, the question for many people is, why should I vote? Not necessarily because of how much I know about the functioning of the European Union, but does it does it make sense for me to vote in this European in these elections? Does my vote really count? Would my vote make any difference? So there is the issue of representative democracy, which clearly in the European Parliament is something we put a lot of importance on, and I don't think that anyone here would question the role of representative democracy in the European Union. But, and this is something that we have seen over the past years, the Commissioner in her video message mentioned the Conference on the Future of Europe. I think this was one of the first really most important and partly also most successful exercises in deliberative and collaborative decision-making, ideas finding. This is clearly something that we need and want to develop in parallel, and as you very much said, as a parallel method next to voting, in addition to voting in the elections, in addition to purely representative democracy in the parliament. We very much are convinced that we need a constant, intensive and meaningful exchange on ideas, input, and that, but I think we come to that in the second round. The challenges is then the feedback mechanism, because listen and learn, as you said, is one side, but it's still a one-way street if we keep it only at that. I think the challenge is, how can I make sure that we give back what we have heard, that we communicate back what has been done with your input? Maybe I leave it for now here. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. I will continue with the European Commission. We have heard from the Vice President Suica her commitment. She is as well, she has been a mayor of a city. We have heard the importance of the experience of the Conference on the Future of Europe and the Citizens Panel. But why the European Commission is helping or understanding the importance of collaborative governance, Thomas?
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. It's really valuable experience also to participate in these exchanges and to hear the different points of view. And also, just to reiterate the message of the Vice President, she's really sorry that she couldn't be with you today, because, as you say, she is very passionate and committed to this, which is an interesting notion, and you put your finger right on that, is she has been an elected politician and a pure representation of this representative governance model that we have in the EU, but is now, on the Commission side, the face of the collaborative and in the inclusive wave that we are having. Exactly because we have the understanding that there is this growing democratic fragility that Gert spoke about, where we are understanding that citizens are really demanding for much more, for much more inclusion, for more voice, and then for more engagement. And this is not an easy task for us as the Commission. The Conference on the Future of Europe, that was also mentioned, was an excellent exercise. We would even claim that it was a little bit more than just a participative or a deliberative process, because we have already there involved the NGOs, we have involved the civil society organizations, we have involved local authorities and regional authorities, we have involved national governments, European Parliament, and also the Commission, so a broad range of stakeholders. One of the things where we haven't perhaps, where we could have perhaps done more, is on the tangible responsibility to implement, and this also goes back to the feedback mechanism in a way. This was due to the fact that we started with
a very broad and open question that at European level is only really, really broad. And then we also had a number of different stakeholders who have their own different powers of acting that complicates things. So I think as we discuss about collaborative governance and how do we make it successful at the various levels, we should always think about who are the players that need to be involved at each of the levels and how they can contribute. We have to be as inclusive as possible, but we also have to be a little bit practical. So sometimes it's a little bit easier to do these things or to start doing these things at the local level where your sphere of control is much higher. At European level, the sphere of controls start to become overlapping. What is the power of the Council? What is the power of the Parliament? What is the power of the Commission? How do we interfere? How do then the member states come in? This becomes rather complicated, but that should not stop us from being inspired by the models that we are seeing here. And that's why it's really exceptionally beneficial for all of us to have this model also being presented more broadly, and we are here to help you to do that and to support you in this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Now I will turn to Maria José from the point of view of the academia. What are the arguments, the drivers for the collaborative governance to succeed and to develop models, and why is this important?
Well, there are many different drivers, but I am going to refer only to one, which is the need that building democratic resilience has of academic lessons. My driver in being involved in this case was that I'm an academic, I am a scholar, always searching for cases that can bring some learning. And when I met Etorkizun Eraikis and I saw that this was a case that not only was achieving things, not only was really progressing in the process, different processes, but only this was a case that really wanted to be linked to knowledge and to academic knowledge. And to me, that was really a driver to be involved in it, because we need academic lessons if we really want collaborative governance to work. And so we brought together scholars from different universities across the world. Etorkizun Eraikis has, from the very beginning, really wanted to see what the academia was thinking and writing about it. We scholars have the risk of going to our own interest and writing about, nothing sometimes, because we have the risk of being disconnected from real practice, from real needs. And practitioners, I've seen this many times, have the risk of being so much involved in the day-to-day needs and challenges that they are not aware of the knowledge that they are really producing. And it is really helpful when practitioners really want to be close to the university and then open to systematize the knowledge that comes from acting. I really think, I'm really confident, and I think the editors, which are this idea, is that some academic lessons are in this book that can help and that can guide us to go beyond deliberation, to get involved in collaboration, and then start singing the song of the co. Because what I've seen in developing these academic lessons is that the key point is to bring action to the thinking and to think about what is being performed, being acted, And not only this book, but also in other contributions that I've been able to be with the Turkish Narekis and with the Diputación, which is using the methodology of action learning, that learning comes from real action, real decisions. And I really think, and I was thinking this when Gert was speaking, that to move, to go beyond deliberation, go beyond talking about it, going beyond talking about the concept, what the model is, going beyond it really needs bringing action to the thought, because it's going beyond pure cognitive categories, the pure cognitive dimension, and then acting, performing, bringing feelings to it. Turkish Narekis has revealed to be a model which is purely relational. Strong relations have been built not only among different civil organizations and Diputación, but also among scholars and practitioners. And we've had really, really enjoyable interactions in the seminars we organized for the book. Here I'm seeing several people who participated in these seminars. And it was really, really enjoyable to see that both practitioners and scholars felt to be discussing about these challenges on an equal footing. Both scholars and practitioners were given the same authority to talk about this. And I thought this is a very fruitful interaction from which the real practice, the real action, the real responses to the needs that democracy have can come because of this. And that was my major driver in being involved in the developing of this collaboration for collaborative governance.
Thank you, Maria Jose. I think that you picture the importance as well of measuring all those actions, very well. So it's a huge task. So, Xavier, I mentioned that you are one of the fathers of the Etorkizun Narekis, one of the practitioners from the very beginning. And why, from your experience on the ground, why this is still important in Gipuzkoa, and how the collaborative governance, how do you see the how is the other panel, but why do you see the importance of this program?
First of all, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here with you all. Especially thanks to Sebas Zurutuza and Ander Arcelus and Olatze Raskin. They are really the core of the Etorkizun Narekis, and they allow me to be here. Thanks, of course, to Markel and Eider. And it's not easy to add anything new about Etorkizun Narekis in this moment, but I try to say something. Etorkizun Narekis is not a perfect project. We do a lot of mistakes. We have a lot of contradictions, but we want to change a political culture. And when we started with Etorkizun Narekis, the most important things was we wanted to change our political culture in order to introduce a new way to work in the provincial council. I think the most important thing is the real will to change a political culture, not only politicians' civic culture, also citizens' civic culture. This is, I think, the most important. When we started with Etorkizun Narekis, we are worried about political disaffection. We are worried about populism. Markel especially is all the time very worried about the populism, because this is the most important risk to the quality of democracy, of the institutional systems. And I think in etorkizunarekiz, the political leadership based in the collaborative vision is very important. The collective leadership, as said in the Congress, Sonia Ospina. No? Collaborative governance is joined with collective leadership. And the most important thing is also to share the power. And the most difficult thing, most difficult, important and difficult thing. Political power with the organized society, with the citizenship. Many times we say we want to share a power, but it's only a political communication strategy. No? No? But in our case, Merkel especially, and her team, his team, want to share a power. And this is the secret of collaborative governance. More things. It's important to organize the deliberate process and the decision-making process in an effective way. And the methodology is very important. Choose also the participants well. And I think for the future, we can speak after that, but I think it's important collective learning process. I think it's important the experimentation in the action. I think it's important also build trust, but build trust to the participant through the action. Build trust with the practitioners. And finally, in etorkizunarekiz, it's very important evaluate the action. We are all the time to evaluate this action to improve our collaborative governance system. And in the results, I think the collaborative governance systems, it helps to increase political legitimacy. I'm not sure with etorkizunarekiz we are more efficient. I'm not sure. I think we need to learn more. We need work more to achieve the more public policies efficient. But I'm very sure that with etorkizunarekiz we generate social capital, we generate more trust, and we generate two important things. A very interesting dialogue between politicians and civil servants. This is fundamental for transforming the public administration, and a very interesting dialogue with the citizens and the organized society to build more trust.
Thank you, Xavier. So, all of you've mentioned a little bit some of the challenges, but maybe Adil, what are the major challenges to display such a type of collaborative governance?
I'm glad you asked that, because there are challenges. There are challenges, and again I'll go to this concept of sort of making democracy, taking it to its next pedestal, next level. My very little contribution to the book was a little comment where I tried to argue that collaborative governance should be thought of as jazz. And by calling it jazz, I was not just trying to be cute. It is a different way of thinking about policy. I was trained as an engineer, so I work in machines, right? And policy usually also works in machines. We will tell what the policy is. Then I will tell you play the trumpet, you play the piano, you play the violin. This is how it will go. This is when you will do something, right? We tell every department what they have to do. And that's a very good way to do policy. That has been historically a useful way. But policy in general has been conceived of as a symphony. And then the leader will say, go, right? And you start on the piano. If you're doing collaborative, then that system doesn't work, because what we are saying is we're going to make music together. We all want to make good music. But now you have the authority to start with the saxophone in the middle without letting anyone know, right? That means confidence. That means the leader's ability to, what Xavier was talking about, to leave that stick at that moment. So that itself is a challenge, right? This is why jazz is not easy. Symphony is also not easy, but jazz is a different type. That is why also jazz very often happens in small rooms. It is difficult to do jazz in big rooms. And I think that is one of the challenge of collaborative governance that we need to figure out. That's the challenge of scale, right? In some ways, Gipuzkoa was lucky in the sense that it has a scale in which jazz can work. But the US, as US, may not have that scale, right? EU may not have that scale. So there's a scale question: at what type of scale can you have collaboration? Now, that doesn't mean collaboration necessarily has to become ineffective after a certain scale. It probably means we need tools of scaling up collaboration, right? Either by turning it into sort of bite-sized pieces that add up to something. That, I think, is one of the challenge intellectually, to think about how to do collaborative governance at scale. The other thing, and I think this is a political challenge in this as well as other areas, things that work when you have a good majority can become frail, or the trust. The word you used is trust, right? And trust very often politically comes from also sort of just majority. Now, once you start, as we have in many parts of the world, with governments that are hanging on one vote, that trust becomes a political tool, right? Because collaborative governance requires not just the trust that I have in you that your idea is good, but the trust that you have in me that I'm not out there to throw you off the bus, right? So I think the political fragility, the link between political fragility and collaboration is, again, an intellectual challenge that needs to be understood. Because, again, a more rigid system allows you to deal with that, because then you can base it simply on rules or on numbers, right? So those two, to me, are particular challenges with the idea. I do not think that when I say they are challenges, that means that's a problem. I'm saying those are conundrums, those are Rubik's cubes that we still have to solve, right? Particularly of this scale. Last thought on this. Scale is something that I have been thinking a lot about as I've gotten to know this experiment. One answer to scale may be modularity, right? So scale, you can grow something is this big and then you grow it bigger and bigger and bigger, right? Buildings grow bigger and bigger and bigger. But there is a different way of getting scale, like forests get scale, not because the one tree becomes super big, but because the one tree throws its seeds and other trees come up, and now you have a huge forest, right? Forests grow very differently from buildings. Buildings grow by just becoming bigger, bigger, bigger. Forests grow by modularity. So to me, maybe the answer to the scale question is in modularity, not in having individual experiments grow in size, but multiple experiments emerge in society.
I turn to Thomas. This question of scale, I think, is a question that we have all in mind when it comes to the European Union? And then the same question for you, Philip. But Thomas, what are the major challenges in addition to scale, or how do you think about this major challenge of the scale?
I very much like this image of a forest, because I think that perhaps is one of the ways forward, is to see, and this is again going back to what I said at the beginning, this example is one we would like to see multiplied across the European Union in smaller and bigger communities. And if we are able to do that, then we will be able to build that practice, that community, that knowledge of how does this process work. We're going to learn much more, as you were saying. We're going to make many more mistakes, and we're going to all collectively learn from those mistakes and be able to move forward, perhaps also at the EU level. We've tried it a little bit upside down in a way with the conference, because we felt that there is enough of a momentum to do it, and we've learned. We've also made mistakes, but I very much like this image of a forest that I think we should explore and continue. And we, as the Commission, should probably have a role of providing some of the tools for that as well, and providing some of the incentives for member states and local governments to do this. And this is one of our aims. It will be one of the aims of the Defense of Democracy package that the Vice President also mentioned. So this is something. This is one way in which we are trying to fight some of these challenges that we presented. On the challenges, I think one of the things that we haven't spoken so much about it here is the institutional element of the administration. Gert mentioned this administrative leadership that is needed. But one of the things that I can tell you we have seen is that the administration also needs to move with the political leadership. There may be political leadership, but the ways of doing are sometimes so strong within the administration that they can block this. And when you also spoke about sharing of the power, it's not only the sharing of the power of the politicians, because it's also about sharing of the power of individual bureaucrats, if you wish, or administrators who are the ones sometimes fearing that if they stepped out and included the others, they would have this barrier, or they would be less important or lose their jobs or whatever. I think so. It's key, again, to have examples of successes and to also experience this. And I can share that within the Commission, before we started doing the Conference on the Future of Europe, there were many who had this feeling. But this shifted a lot with those who were involved in this process, who actually saw that they can learn and benefit and enrich themselves through exchanges with citizens and with others on this. It is not easy. It takes time. So challenge is time, challenge is resources, challenge is also this ability to make the leap of faith and to trust that you will get something out of it. At, I think, also this administrative level, which I think is not something to be underestimated.
Thank you, Thomas. Philip.
Thank you.
Your views.
Do you have a list of major challenges for the institution? Then you listen to a guy who basically tells you it can be done. We actually did it. We just went and shared the power, because that's the basis. And then you think, oh my God, and you picked on that one, how is this going to work with us? I think this is one of the key challenges indeed that on the European level, and I think basically on every other political level you need to be prepared to give something up, take the leap of faith, have the trust that you will get something in return that might even be more will be, sorry, you see already the language might even be more, yeah. Let's assume for the purpose of the exercise, will be more enriching at the end of the day. I think once you do that, this list of things becomes administrative, manageable, if there is the will to it. Yes, there is an issue with representativity. How do we ensure, specifically on the European level, how do we ensure representativity? You had the EPRS graph at the beginning. There's another mapping that we did purely now with legislative stakeholders down to regional and local government. I think we're talking about 100,000 legislative organizations, stakeholders down to local and regional level that we should and would have to work with in a way of collaborative governance. How do you address the issue of power imbalance to make sure that specifically marginalized, specifically vulnerable communities are represented? Again, I think the forest example might help, because the big let's get everyone into the plenary meeting room of the European Parliament will not work out at the end of the day. This will not be enough to ensure representativeness. Also dealing with the diverse interests and values that you would be confronted with. Clearly, the question again, trusting that the process will lead us to finding common ground, to develop a consensus which will be clearly much more difficult than we are used to. Again, I'm coming a little bit back to one of the figures that I quoted at the beginning. For me, looking at the development of image and trust figures in the European Union, the turning point was 2010. Since then, as I said, more or less positive continued development or trend towards increased trust, increased positive image in the European Union. Why? I believe that at that point in time, people saw for the first time that decisions taken on the European level would have an immediate impact on their personal life. Simple terms, Monday morning meeting of the Commission, Tuesday morning banks in Greece don't open. Sorry for making this a little bit too short, but we were used to a 5, 6, 7 years transformation period of laws adopted in Brussels until they hit the ground on the national, regional, or local level, at which point in time they might even have lost the European flag and logo on that, and has become something that the current government has implemented, and let's forget about Brussels. This has changed, and I think we're partly on the administration, partly also on the political level, we're a little bit limping behind, is that to understand that citizens see, people see actually to an increased degree, a far higher degree, the impact of decisions taken here, whereas we partly still tend to think within this black box, that we can do our stuff here and no one is going to notice, and afterwards, let's see, but hasn't been us. I'm always famously unguarded when I'm talking, sorry.
Yes, please.
Before I forget, because this is important. This is one of the challenges. I don't think collaborative governance is a silver bullet for everything. So one of the challenges is figuring out what issue it will work for.
Yeah.
I suspect some of those failures are where the match wasn't right. Not every issue is made to work collaboratively on, right? So jazz is not a substitute for the symphony. Mm-hmm. You still have to play the symphony. Mm-hmm. A lot of governance will happen in other ways. This is now an additional tool for an appropriate set of questions, right? like in your case, transport or climate, right? There are a certain type of issues for which collaborative will work better than another set. And part of leadership is knowing which is which.
Maria Jose.
Challenges.
Challenges.
Okay, I'm going to refer to the challenge of communication, how to communicate collaborative governance, and particularly because I am thinking that, using the metaphors that have been brought today, that we need to play the co song, but with a jazz mode. So what's the role that communication can play on this? And in a nutshell, I would say that the role communication has is to establish relationships, strong relationships with the different actors that are engaged or involved in collaborative governance. Because many times what occurs to people who are in communication, I am in the field of communication, is that we use communication to sell the product, and then to tell the others what I am doing. And that communication doesn't help at all, collaboration, because it doesn't help. So what challenges are included in this conceptualization of communication for collaborative governance? Well, one is to craft solid narratives that really align different actors around common goals. Also, there is the challenge of combining, sharing the power, as Xavier was saying, sharing the power with coordinating the message, because there is a tension there, and I've seen problems and contradictions in Turkish now, because we want to share the power, but then when there's some reference center communicating on its own, so how can we involve that actor in the common goal, but at the same time really sharing the power? And how do you organize that communication? And that coordination is difficult. Also, it is difficult to engage the media's attention to policies which are intangible. And this learning in what the Turkish Energy has done, because they have realized the difficulties when calling the media to come and cover what? There's nothing yet there. So that's challenging. And a real challenge there that I've seen in not only in Turkish but in other projects is to avoid instrumentalizing the program for electoral purposes and to avoid self-promoting communication. And that is difficult because the party is going to tell you. So are you selling? Elections are coming. How many people know of this program? And for collaborative governance to happen, you need to wait and to wait and to wait, even though not many people know of the project, but you need to wait if you really want for collaboration to happen, because once audiences see that you are looking for vote with that, collaboration will stop. And also to combine substance with presentation. You have to place attention on real actions, on real achievements. Are we really providing something to citizens, to people? But you have also to put it on the stage, because if it is not seen, then it could be that it is not happening. In politics, what is not seen doesn't happen. So again, that managing and that tension is challenging. And finally, I'm going to mention the challenge of assessing and evaluating outcomes and impact. And the challenge, it has been already pointed out, but it is the challenge of how do you finding metrics, and metrics about intangible outcomes, metrics of legitimacy, of trust, and so on. But I would say that the challenge is not only to have figures and metrics to account for what we are doing and then protect ourselves to those putting funds on it, that we are doing it, we're providing this. it is the challenge of evaluating to get feedback from different actors. I think it was Philip mentioning it, to get feedback and to learn from the feedback so that you can feed the program back with what is really happening to the actors that are involved in collaboration.
Thank you, Maria Jose. So, Javier, can you mention some of the challenges you are facing? Briefly, because I would like to
Yes,
open the
very
debate,
shortly.
because you mentioned as well some of
Yes.
them before.
I want to say three things only. I think it's important to understand that the public space, the public institutions are not a property by the public space. Public space is a very complex space and is a common space to the citizens, to the politicians, to the organized society. I think we need involve citizens in the political community. Now the distance is very, very big, and this is a very important problem when we speak about democracy. I think we need to learn manage complexity. Our mentality is a rational mentality, functional mentality. We understand the classic music, but we don't understand the jazz music. And we need to learn that. I think also it's important improve the experimentation systems into the public administration. Also, we need the last idea. We need also improve the dialogue with civil servants, with stakeholders, etc. And finally, we need to work into political parties because for interiorizing collaborative governance, generally, political parties don't understand collaborative governance, and political parties are the best intermediate in the democracy and are the most important actors, or very important actors in the democracy. And if we want to need the public policy, we need work also with the political parties.
Thank you, Xavier. Well, so many things. Now I would like to open the debate to the public here, to the audience. If you have any question. Yes, Ander, yes. Yeah, the micro.
Yes, thank you. How to persuade to those citizens that believe in classical leadership and leadership based on hierarchy, and people think that that is the good leadership, that leadership based on dialogue and humility are even better, and that is not a kind of weak leadership.
Mm-hmm. Who wants to answer, Xavier?
I can answer that. We need work together to learn that. We need work together to learn that. This is the answer. Sure.
Mm-hmm. Is there any other question from the audience? Yes, please.
Hi, thank you so much. My question is, how do you propose to engage to the young people to get involved in this collaborative governance? I think it's quite difficult issue to do. Thank you.
Yes.
I would say we both have something to contribute on from the institutional side. I'm just looking forward to Just looking forward to the European Youth event, for example, that we're organizing in Strasbourg end of May. We're expecting 12,000 young people. I think this will be the largest event this will be the largest youth event that the Parliament has ever organized. This is a fully co-created event. By the way, I was just thinking about that because we have quite a lot of discussions with youth organizations, youth groups that are building the program themselves there. And I was looking at the building the future, and this is one of the remarks that is always coming back when you say, you are the future, young people are the future, etc. They say always, no, we're the present. We're not the future. We don't care about the future, about tomorrow. We're the present. We care about now. And this is now where we want to be involved. So actually, the reaching out is not difficult because there is a lot of engagement, a lot of will, a lot of interest to participate, to co-create, to bring in their opinions, their demands, their requests. The difficulty, again, is how to make this meaningful, because the frustration risk is very high if you just basically bring them in for a one-off event, and then you never come back again. So that is the challenge that we are confronted with, that in the Parliament we are trying to set up over the past editions of the Eye and with everything else that we do with the youth outreach, to really have a horizontal approach where we aim to introduce the input that we become to the different layers of policy making in the committees, etc. Because this is absolutely relevant also to give the opportunity that for them, for the inputters, if you want to receive the feedback, to see that this has arrived and has been taken on.
If I may also add to that, we do have a number of ways in which we're engaging with youth at EU level. There's the EU Youth Dialogue, and there are a number of other initiatives that we're doing. But one thing that we need to go and work on further is actually education, and building this civic education from the very young age. And I would say also taking this approach to schools, having schools, children experiment in making these type of decisions, in being included, in living through deciding on, you know, what color of the wall will be, or when do they take their meal or whatever. But the key thing there for me is also all of us coming together and working from a very beginning to empower our young people to live through these processes, where they will then be able to also request even more participation in them from us later.
Yes, Javier, yes. Yeah.
I think collaborative governance is important, and we connect with collaborative governance with young people, but also it's very important a new political agenda to connect with young people, climate change, equalities or inequalities, and the inclusive processes.
Yes, Billy. Yes.
I don't think it's on.
Yes?
Is it? Ah, okay, all right. Hey, hi, everyone. Thanks for the discussion. It was very engaging. And, well, I knew about the project, so it was great to hear about it again. I'm wondering, I'm following with the metaphor of the jazz. Sometimes you go to a jazz concert, and the musicians, they don't know each other, they didn't rehearse. One of them is late, and in the end you have something that is really like bollocks. It doesn't work, this music. And I'm wondering, picking up on that, like when the collaborative governance, collaborative model doesn't work, let's say, I heard something that Adil Najem, I think, if I don't pronounce it wrongly, talk about, okay, it works better in some kind of problems, other problems we leave them apart, let's say. That could be a solution, but I'm wondering, like, if it doesn't really work, like, what do? Do we fall back to the old way, or do we try to engage before so that those problems don't arise? Or and also, like, for example, I'm thinking if we go back to a more hierarchical way of taking decisions, like it could build up into the frustration. Let's say I'm engaged in this problem, and then in the end, my comments are disregarded because someone thought that was not nice music, let's say. So yeah, thanks.
Yes. We are really running behind, and I suggest that we can answer to your question in the next panel, maybe, and as well, I think that you can even intervene from the seats for in order to react to the whole discussion, because I don't want to jeopardize the next panel. So sorry, but your question will be answered. So thank you.
It was an answer, not a question.
It was an answer, not a question, that's for sure. So thank you to my distinguished panelists. It has been very insightful and inspirational. So I hand over to you, Maria Jose, for the second panel.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, thank you. So yes, we've already got many questions from the previous session, and we are going to focus on the how to implement it. So I'm going to start by asking my panelists first question about what's your major learning when implementing, designing, thinking about collaborative governance. And I'm going to follow the order that is in the program. So maybe first Mr. David Mayor.
Ah, okay.
Or
Right.
Mayor, yeah.
I was hoping to gather my thoughts.
Do you want to?
Yes, I'll go. I do have some notes.
Okay.
Thank you very much for this invitation. In case you don't know, I work in the Joint Research Centre of the European Commission, which is a full department inside the European Commission, but a special one. Our job is to bring science and knowledge into the EU policy-making processes. And for some years, we have had a team looking at research and evidence in the field of collaborative governance. So we, in fact, have a centre, the Commission Centre for Participatory and Deliberative Democracy. I'm sure we can explore what the difference between that and collaborative governance is, but it's, I think, very closely related. And so what have we learned from the evidence that we've been gathering and through the exercises we have carried out? I think the number one lesson, which is one we keep on repeating to everyone, which is in any public authority at any level of government, is do not do this if you do not really mean it. So if you're going to do it, mean it and do it properly and properly take into account the results. So occasionally there are debates about should public authorities be forced to use these techniques and required in some sense. And I don't think that is the way to go. I think what you need is public authorities who genuinely think that these tools and techniques can help them with the problems they face. So they are fully invested in doing them well, getting them right, but also taking into account the results. So when faced with a slightly sort of half-hearted department or public authority, I would prefer to say, look, if you don't really see the point and you don't really see the benefit, don't do it, because it's actually worse to do it in a half-hearted fashion than not at all. So I don't think these new forms of governance really need to be pushed so much, is they have to be pulled into the culture of public administration and governance. I think we have to bring the evidence to light about how these tools can be very helpful in the most difficult and contested and polarized areas to help us uncover where perhaps the hidden majority is less polarized than appears to be the case when you see the extremes on Twitter or social media.
Okay, thank you. Don't do it if you don't really mean it. So that's first lesson, important. Daniele Dotto?
It's
Oh,
Mina's
sorry, it's
replacing.
Mina. Yeah, I was thinking, well, if it's just Mina, so
No, yeah.
tell you. Oh, yeah.
Well, thank you. Yes, I work in the Director General for the for structural reforms in the Commission for support of structural reforms. Our experience is not that much with collaborative governance, but rather with how public administration change. And I would like to connect with the previous conversation where it was mentioned that public administration is sometimes quite rigid and does not seem to be so prone to new practices. But a very interesting reflection that is actually taking place today within the European Network for Public Administration is what are the values and principles of public administration, the EU. And what's interesting about this reflection is that it's actually a sequel. The first report or study on that took place back in 2005. And today, about 20 years ago, we see what has changed. And it's quite interesting that if you compare the two reports, you see that there is a core, which is very much the classic bureaucracy of model of ensuring legality, equal treatment. But at the same time, there is a new layer around that is emerging, and it's very much around focusing at the users, the needs, human centricity. Also, building consensus is very much about what collaborative governance is. Also, quite interesting element that appeared there is the permission to make mistakes within public administration that's very much linked to experimentation. So there is a very new narrative, I think, emerging within public administration itself that in addition to protecting the public good, there is also the interest into ensuring public, individual, but also planetary well-being with the discussions around climate, decarbonization, and all that. So why is this important? Because the way we think about public administration reflects very much on how we manage it. How much resources do we ensure for what kind of functions? Is experimentation, for example, something that public administration should do or not? What kind of financial but also human resources we need there, how much we need to ensure the skills for communication, for interaction with different stakeholders, for experimentation, for working with the academia and so on. And these are all changes that are happening, and unfortunately, because we speak very much about cultural change as well, these kind of changes take time, and 20 years probably from political perspective are too unreasonable, but at the end of the day, when we talk about human and human behavior, that's the time span that we see. I think there is a positive message that public administration is adopting.
Thank you, Mina. Thanks. So I will stress this idea of having permission to make mistakes that allow for experimentation and to go along the time that you need for implementing change. Thank you. Angela Hansen.
Hello, Eganon. My name is Angela Hansen. I'm with the OECD Observatory of Public Sector Innovation. So we look around the world at different cases of how governments are innovating and what that looks like. So I'm really glad that we have this panel about the how, because it's not very unusual for everybody to agree on the why, but the how is where it gets messy. That's when we're talking about changing vested interests, we're talking about power sharing, and those topics that have been coming up. So the how is really important. And to us, innovation is the how. But innovation can also be done for different purposes. So we look at innovation for efficiency's sake, to enhance public services, to make them work better and cost less. We look at innovation for the purpose of achieving a mission, so carbon neutrality by a certain date. For instance, we look at adaptive innovation, so innovating in response to changed reality on the ground. Over the last few years, we've been doing a lot of that in response to COVID. And the area where we think governments need to be investing more is anticipatory innovation. And we were fortunate enough to follow the case of Etorkizune Erakis and to look at not only the authorizing environment for anticipation, but also the agency or the capacity. And the biggest lesson for me and for us in this case was that you need both. You need the authorizing environment, meaning you need to have a way to break away from those vested interests. You need to have the legitimacy to act. So you need, in some cases, a very high trust environment in institutions. You need those relationships with actors in the community. But you also need the capacity. You need the tools, the methods, the different ways of thinking, the different types of evidence and information in order to see that change. Because what you're really asking is of politicians and the administration is to act without evidence, actually, and that's very hard to do. And there's very few disincentives for, there's no cost for doing nothing. If something goes wrong and we didn't anticipate, well, that's just how the world works. And we're trying to push governments in our work to push against that narrative and actually put in place structures to anticipate and to act based on that information. It's not enough to do strategic foresight exercises. It's also important to take those learnings into action. So it was very interesting to follow the case of the collaborative governance work in Gipuzkoa. And I say, actually, to make it an interesting panel, I'm going to do a counterpoint to what Mr. Mayor mentioned, is that, you mentioned if you're going to not do it well, don't do it. We often see governments not doing anything because they're scared to dare. And so I would make the counterpoint, and I guess we will debate that, to have a space to do the jazz and a space to do the symphony. And something successful, I think it's when people hear the jazz music and they decide to continue that tune and they're singing it in the streets, and others are copying that style in the future, meaning it's sustained. So to take the metaphor, I don't know if I'm answering the question that was raised earlier, but that's my few biggest learnings from the work.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Thanks. Yes. Okay, Eider Mendoza.
Pour rendre ce concert de jazz un peu plus complexe et un peu plus riche, je vais parler en français.
More rich, more diverse, I will speak
Et
French.
ce que j'ai appris de plus important
What I
par rapport à
learned,
la gouvernance
which matters
collaborative,
the most
moi je dois
when
dire
it comes
que
to
je suis tout à
governance
fait d'accord avec ce que dit
cooperative,
Xavier et ainsi que vous.
and will I fully agree with
Et
what has been said
on a
before.
commis une grosse
Yeah,
erreur,
we've made a big
c'est-à-dire
mistake.
qu'on a commencé à construire tout
We
un
started
système
to build an entire
de
system
gouvernance collaborative
of collaborative
avec
governance
institutions,
with
d'autres
other institutions
publiques,
and other public
l'académie, etc.
administrations,
Mais par
academy and
contre, on n'a pas
others,
fait ce travail-là
but we didn't do that
au sein
work within
de notre gouvernement.
our government.
On a 1900
So
employés,
we have 1900 people working with
une
us.
institution absolument
It's
hiérarchique.
an institution with
On a beaucoup de
hierarchy,
difficultés à
and
travailler
where it's
ensemble.
very hard to work together. And this is something we started to do much later, when we became aware that we would not be credible if we would not do that work within our own institution. So we tried to correct that mistake. We have acknowledged our mistake, and then we started working within the deputation. And there, I must say that the results are very good. We have worked out with Maria Jose. We've learned to work together. We've learned to solve problems in a cooperative fashion. And what really matters, I think, except the fact that we have really successfully solved historical problems, we've also built new spaces for trust. This is what really matters to foster cooperation. This is what I've learned. So first, work within your own office, and then build spaces of trust, because it will help you move forward.
Thanks, Eider. Yeah, your comments give side to this idea that the how is messy, and we need to decide whether jazz, whether symphony, how to give spaces for both, and how to anticipate innovation with no evidences. And what Eider has said is mentioned some examples from Turkish Suna that gives life to this idea. Miren Larrea.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm going to share some lessons learned as a researcher in Turkish Suna Araikis, and more specifically an action researcher. And I have to say that it's been a privilege for a researcher to be part of the core of a Turkish Suna Araikis, where knowledge was being generated in real time. And I'm going to try to share some of the lessons learned in that experience. And I want to start saying that I have struggled a little bit with one of the terms in the question, which is implementing. Because sometimes when we imagine implementation, it's like we have an idea of what we want to build in our minds. We have theories, frameworks, idealized collaborative governance, and then maybe we feel implementing means like applying what we have in our minds out there. And sometimes we imagine even out there is a kind of vacuum where we are going to create something new that does not exist. But then when we go there, collaborative governance, maybe not, but there are very strong ways of doing things that have been institutionalized for years. And what we see is that it's not about implementation, it's about transformation. We have to transform what is already there. And what is already there, it has very strong roots, and it's very difficult to change. So that there is a lot of complexity in transformation. So one of the lessons learned for me, it's more than implementation, it's about transformation of what we have. And I think that we have learned how to transform. But I want to underline that one of the interesting things for me is that the Provincial Council has invested in creating knowledge about how to transform for years, because I've been working as an action researcher almost full-time in the Provincial Council since 2009. So it means that they were already investing in creating knowledge that was specific about how, not about what. They already knew what they wanted to do, but they were collaborating with us to experiment how to transform. And I think that's very important because, as you said, 20 years is nothing in some processes. We are 14 years working to develop knowledge on how, and I think that's one of the big assets of Etorkizuna Eraikiz, that know-how is in the process and in a lot of people that are participating in this process. And my main lesson learned about how we transform is praxis. And Maria Jose, you already told about this. But I think that we can have, we need theory, and we need good theory, and we need practice, and we need good practice. But it's possible to have very good theory, very good concepts about collaborative governance, and have very good practice, and still not to be transformative. Mm-hmm. So the challenge is a very nuanced relationship between theory and practice, where that good theory we have, it's really affecting practice, but also, and sometimes we forget this, our practical knowing then should shape our theorizing, so that we go from theory to practice and from practice to theory again and reframe our concepts and go to practice again and then change our practice and go to our concepts again and reframe them. So I think that's a very nuanced relationship. It's very difficult to explain, but I think it's a core lesson learned, that it's praxis. It's not theory plus practice, it's praxis that we need in this very nuanced relationship. And then very shortly, what I have learned about praxis is that praxis makes processes emergent. It's about jazz. We don't know beforehand how the music is going to sound. And that generates tension and generates stress because you are investing your time and money in something and you don't know, you don't have the guarantee that it's going to sound good. And still you have to be brave and say, I believe in this, we're going to invest in this music. And that emergence has generated tensions and difficulties in the project. And one last thing, I think that we have learned a lot about respecting different types of knowledge. Because when you put together people coming from university, academia, with good theoretical frameworks, and people that are coming from practice, that dialogue is not easy. And it's very important to respect each other's knowledge because we can very easily fall in saying, oh, academics, they don't know about the real world. Oh, practice, they are so, simple or not elevated or whatever. So I think that mutual respect has been one lesson learned that is also very relevant to understand how we can transform reality.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thanks, Mary. So I could say that a common idea that is core to different interventions is that we learn about the how by doing it and by learning from mistakes, by learning from what is happening. My second question is, and of course you can come back to the first one if you like, or to respond to what others have said, particularly you. Where do you see major areas for development for the contribution of collaborative governance to democratic resilience?
Same order?
Well, I'm going to free you. So maybe Angela? Well,
I'll go second.
Who wants to start? Yeah.
I don't mind.
Yes.
Shall I go? I have to say that I had prepared 3 ideas I want to share, but I found very interesting in the first discussion what you said about woods and this discussion about scope. So I want to share some contributions that action research might make here, because I think that one of the challenges is about how we gain scope with this. And there was an action researcher, a Norwegian action researcher, Bjørn Gustavsen, who wrote The Challenge of Scope, precisely trying to face these kind of situations. And they have a really interesting experiment where all through Norway, they created different action research experiments. And then the idea was, like in the idea of the forest, not to make them grow, but connect them. But what I found interesting in his work is that he said that first we need to let every experimental process learn and grow on its own. And only when they are sufficiently consolidated, we connect and start to learn with each other. Because if we start the learning process from the beginning, maybe there are, we start like considering some best practices, whatever, and everybody starts imitating others. So their proposal was to generate these different spaces of experimentation, but letting each of them generate their own kind of knowledge and adapt to their own circumstances and then connect. And I think that that's one of the challenges we are addressing now when we consider action researchers as a global community. Our idea is to try to connect with other projects that are developing this kind of transformational processes and try to learn from them, but always trying to have our own space. First, to develop singular knowledge, and then consider that we can contribute with a singular knowledge to other processes.
Thank you. Mina, so we want this one.
Well, a few reflections on that. First of all, probably on democratic resilience. I want to connect it to the most interesting thing that I've read on institutional resilience. That institutional resilience is when you have two parts of a system. One is that continues to work in a stable way and delivers what it is expected to do, but you have, especially for administrative systems, they call them now bureaucracy hackers. So the people that are reflecting how the system can improve, what it can do better, and how it can deliver better to its purpose. So if we take this to the democratic resilience, I guess it will be interesting to see how we can make democracy work, but at the same time improve it on the go. And that brings me very much to the work that we do in reforming public administration. One very interesting learning, and that actually comes also from the research area, is that what we've been trying to do in the past decades is very much an institutional mimicry. So we look into a system, we see the formal sides of it, how it's organized, what are the rules, what are the practices, and we try to put this in a different context. And we have quite a lot of evidence that this doesn't always work. And the reason why it doesn't work is because there are a lot of ephemeral, not tangible things there, especially about behavior, connections. Someone was talking earlier about relations, building relations. And these are things that are not so easy to capture within a model and not so easy to translate. And I think for us, especially in our DG and all the projects that we are doing with member states, that's one of the most important learnings and the direction in which we want to go. For us, every reform process is not so much a transfer of a model that we've seen somewhere else or that exists, but very much a learning process for the organization that wants to develop or the system wants to develop. And that leads me to another thing that is super important for us. It's the understanding of the power of people I read in the book. And that's very much about the human capital that you have in the public administration and to that extent also at the political level. We tend to see civil servants as quite, rigid again and looking into what the law says, but actually there are quite a lot of inspired people that want to make public administration really work better and deliver to the citizens. And very often it's said that in order for a system to change, you need the political leadership, the agreement, but actually there are quite a lot of examples across Europe that show that there are a lot of civil servants that don't wait for the permission to do change, but really try to see within their own working environment what could be done better and how they can really do all this participatory work, think how to engage more, if not necessarily the citizens, the wider citizenship, but then at least more stakeholders in order to have more informed and inclusive decisions or project implementation. And that's a very important takeaway for us, because we see that reputation of public administration is not always good, and public administration is usually shown as the first culprit for things that don't work well. But building social capital, not only in the society and public administration, is important. And then one other thing that is very much linked to what we do, but also what David Mayer's unit is doing and service, it's reflecting on how to take decisions taking into account the public interest or defining public interest while we're taking decisions. And on one hand, we want to make decisions more informed and take best evidence, best science knowledge that we have, but we see that sometimes public will or interest does not necessarily go hand in hand. There were a lot of examples during the COVID crisis now around the climate discussions or decarbonization. You see that people don't necessarily want to change their way of life for all sorts of reasons. And one difficulty that we have there in making public decisions is to understand how to, well, it's not so much about knowledge, but very much about values and how we follow these values, how we transform them into decisions. And sometimes there are competitive interests or competitive views how to follow these values. One very interesting discussion that I heard during the COVID crisis, for example, was what is more important, my right to have my life protected or my freedom to move and do and even to take danger, I mean, to endanger my life. So what is here, life or freedoms? And sometimes you have, even in public debate, and when you have to build consensus, all these very difficult and very, very divergent views. So when we talk about how collaborative governance can actually help with democratic resilience, it's very interesting and useful, I think, to see how we can create those agreements, consensus, while allowing to everyone to have their voice and express their views. And then also taking into account that public decisions are only the most optimal decisions. They are always people that are more concerned or groups that are more concerned, other that are less, winners and losers from decisions, and we need to accommodate practically for everyone. Mm-hmm. And I guess when we try to do that, to involve more people, then the trust in democracy and the feeling that it works well will grow.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Mina. Angela?
Yeah, it's a really difficult question for sure. Strengthening democracy is a big topic for us in the Governance Directorate at the OECD, and we're looking at the multiple dimensions of that. A lot of our work is around trust in government and trust in institutions, and we're not doing well overall. 40% mistrust their government. So that's the average across OECD countries. It's variable, and especially young people. So I think there's a lot of work to be done engaging the next generation and creating those spaces where there's the opportunity to build a shared imagination and different narratives, especially about the future. Young people don't have a lot to look forward to with all of the forecasts around climate, and the time to act is now. So we keep hearing the time to act is now, but they're seeing their representatives, in some cases, not doing enough or not doing anything at all according to their perception. So I think having fora for discussing exactly what needs to happen, not that we don't realize that we all need to change, but we've been hearing, for instance, the climate reports for a number of years, but we haven't done enough. We haven't acted to the extent needed. So I think those fora for discussing the values that would change, or what vested interests would be held above others in the course of these actions through action research, for example, I think are really important to define the should. And not all vested interests are bad. A lot of times they keep us from changing and advancing and being proactive. But in the case of the Basque Country, there's a strong emphasis on equality. So that's a value that we discuss through the case of trying to take forward while doing this anticipatory work. So my point is, there needs to be fora for discussing this, and also for doing the anticipatory intelligence gathering. So not waiting for positions to be formed before taking action, but really detecting the signals of change in how young people or everybody are discussing the events that are unfolding and then using that information to inform actions with consultation throughout. So I think those fora are really missing. There's a really interesting work, for instance, with the deliberative democracy structures, but I really think more needs to be done with those spaces. And then, yes, just taking the action, as Mr. Olano mentioned, the renovate or die, which I think could be a new slogan for DG Reform. It's really exactly the message to governments: renovate or die. Because as soon as you lose that legitimacy that you're representing the values and the expectations of you as a government, it's a quick slide in trust. So I would say really focusing on those fora and really listening to, in particular, youth.
Okay, thanks. David?
Lots of interesting things have been said. I'll try and pick up some of these themes. I think there's two possible angles. The first possible angle is if governments at all levels get better at understanding the lived experience of citizens, maybe trust in government and democracy will go up. It's an attractive, appealing argument. I very much want that to be true. One of the challenges in this entire field is we don't really have much evidence for that. So I would add another bit to your theory and praxis. I think what we desperately need to do is to bring in the empirical data. So people aren't yet doing behavioral experiments where they try different treatments for how to do these exercises and work out which one really works. So I think there's a big job to do to use behavioral science and psychology to understand what is the X variable in how we do these exercises that really works. Is it the smile as you greet the people? Is it the configuration of the tables? Is it the body language of the facilitator? There are so many variables going on which make the difference between a transformative exercise and a non-transformative exercise. And there is some interesting sort of deliberation science beginning to emerge, drawing on the science of collective intelligence. And that, I think, we have to get to the bottom of if we want to begin to realize these activities. I think the second major stream, and everyone said the word, so I'll do a plug for this work we did. So this is a report we did on how our values and our identities guide what we want out of politics. And this was all part of an effort to give Commission colleagues, policymakers, a way to systematically understand the different things that we want in society, because we do want different things. And I think what is so powerful about all these collaborative governance techniques is that we are bringing back and rediscovering ways of disagreeing better amongst ourselves. And there has been a profound shift in the media information environment in the last few years, which has weaponized polarization, extremism, emotion, all the things which are necessary and important in political debates, but it's exaggerated them. So we have this difficult picture. We think people are more extreme because the media environment is dominated by extreme voices. And I think the power of these techniques is we can learn again how to disagree with each other, find compromise, to negotiate the different values and identities we have. And I don't see that happening in any other forum. And if we lose this ability to come together and understand and talk through each other, the different things that we want, then I think I think that is the underlying, that's the basic reason why our democracies are struggling, is we know that we're going to want fundamentally different things. Some things we want in common, but fundamentally evolution appears to code us to continually want different things. There are repeating patterns. And therefore the great question for any democracy is how can you contain the plurality and the multitudes and still somehow get stuff done, agree to do things. And we are losing the ability to manage these tensions which are always there. And I think these wonderful new techniques begin to show us how. And it came home to me where someone was talking about a technique and they said, the politicians have forgotten how to do this because particularly in majoritarian systems, if they want to get elected, they need to play to the extremists. And they're often more extreme, even than their party base and the people who vote for them. And they need to sit in the back of these things and see, okay, so that's how people with different opinions can talk to each other. Maybe we need to learn that and bring it back into the political process.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Ada.
Moi, je pense qu'il faut inviter plus de monde
Well, I think
à participer.
it is necessary to invite more people to get involved in the processes. There are 70,000 people who were involved. But have a lot more people and still have to wait for a lot of people. We need to get them involved. So we need to keep working on that. I very much liked this example of jazz. But even if jazz, well, it's something quite sophisticated. Not everybody likes jazz. Not everybody has a music instrument. Not everybody knows how to play. So we have this big singing tradition in the Basque country. So someday I would like to listen to an orchestra with a big choir, and all the people who attend this concert would finally start singing, so that in the end we can do something together. That would be a process. So it's really important to work together and to get there. It's hard to get there. I have no key for that, but I think that we need to further deepen the participatory process with the citizens. We have worked a lot on this, and I hope it is not easy, and we have the feeling that it's always the same people who get involved, and that's a risk. We have to admit that. And we've made new experiences with that, and we heard that. We had the participatory processes in place with the citizens, with citizens' assemblies. They were very demanding with us, but also very interesting. Why? Well, simply because we chose people at random. We trained them. And these people understood the responsibility that they have. So they committed. They made recommendations. The government took that into consideration, and we committed into implementing that. And these people will follow the entire process from the government to check if we're following this or not. So I think this is the way to go, among others, of course, not the only one. It requires a lot of time. There's a lot of commitment. It's a commitment from these people who get involved, of course. And, you say 100 people, but we have 700,000 inhabitants. So it takes years and years. We don't have enough time. But we need to further deepen this and improve these experiments that we're carrying out.
Thank you, Aida. We have some minutes for discussion, so I'm going to pass the floor to the people. And we have also in the room this question, what to do if the piece doesn't sound well with the jazz. Some kind of responses have already been given to that, but I also invite panelists from the previous table, if you want to say something about that question or whatever question that is on the table. Yeah. Questions? Comments? Luis? Oh, no. No? Yes. You want to make the question again?
Not really a question, it's a comment. I was hearing about trust and how to engage the youth and everything, and how the youth mistrust the government, like I heard 40% or something. I don't recall the numbers. I just a comment there. Maybe the day that I see the youth trusting the government, I will be worried, right? I mean, I see the youth as those there, you talked about the bureaucracy hackers. They could be the society hackers. They want change. They want things to be different. We don't talk to them how they want to about what they want to listen. So I love that they challenge the status quo. So, I mean, just a comment. It's not really a question, but...
Yeah, yeah, good point, yes.
Does the government trust the young people? That's the real question.
Yeah.
That could be it, yeah.
Yeah. Yes. More comments? Yes, Adil.
Since the jazz thing seems to have caught root, I'll just say one thing. A metaphor is only a metaphor.
Yeah.
You shouldn't take it any more seriously than that. So any concept has its limit. But I think the point that my friend was making here is the right one, and I would like to repeat it. Jazz is not an alternative to other things, or collaborative governance should not be seen as an alternative to other forms of governance. It is one more tool. I think we will make a terrible mistake if we try to apply collaborative governance on everything. Because it won't work, and then you will lose faith in it and not even do where it will work. Right? So I think it needs that humility. And sometimes in your example, it doesn't work because it shouldn't work. Sometimes it doesn't work, and again, Markel will tell you about this, because the participants were the wrong ones. The saxophone player didn't show up, right? So you find the right participants. And so that so-called failure of jazz is, jazz musicians will say, is improvisation. So again, I do think it is a useful metaphor, but it's only a metaphor. But the more important thing is collaborative governance should be seen as one more tool in our arsenal of doing governance, rather than some magic solution that is going to change everything. That will be a terrible mistake.
Yeah, thank you, Adele. Very important comment. Yeah. And in a way, I think it is something that we in Turkish Unirikis, you've mentioned a lot, is that making mistakes is really helpful, because you try to learn from the mistakes you make, and sometimes the learning is that no, here this collaboration is not what is needed here in this specific case. Yeah, more comments, questions? Yeah, just sure.
Yeah, sorry, just a phrase on your last sentence on learning. I think that's a very important point, and we start to see that more and more governments are trying to learn from experience, and we didn't have this until very recently. We were very much focused on the future. Yeah. We have our new strategy, our new plan, our new policy. We want to implement it. We show some indicators that things have happened, and we go for the next thing. And we realize that it's more and more important to go back and to see what worked, what didn't work, and why. And that's, you mentioned before, evaluations. I think there are more and more attempts really to understand what had happened and what we can take out of it for the next exercise.
Yeah, thank you. Angela?
Yes, 100% on the learning and reflection as the first step, perhaps, to anything. Just to underscore some of the work that we do in the observatory around portfolio management, so a portfolio of innovation. It's not enough to have one framework or one set of tools, but really a multitude of tools for different purposes. So collaborative governance is one. The jazz approach of kind of exploring. And some of the work that we did with Turkish Unirikis was looking at experimentation for different purposes. So you can do experimentation, randomized control trials, to try to find a more efficient way or a better way through behavioral insights to deliver a policy. You can also do really kind of radical experimentation to try to see what a new policy potential could shift in terms of public values. And is that going to create an issue? So classic example is universal basic income experiments, not from Gipuzkoa, but elsewhere, that are really asking us to rethink what our relationship with work. So these are all experiments, but they're experiments for different purposes. So something that we tried to stress in the observatory is having that portfolio approach. And I know that sometimes if you have jazz playing and you have a symphony playing at the same time, you get maybe some dissonance there, but that's a good thing. And something that's very difficult for large organizations and bureaucracies is to have those distinct spaces and those concurrent processes, as Gert mentioned earlier, doing simultaneous types of administration at once. But it really is the new, I hope, the new normal for future public administrations.
Okay, more questions? Yes, Adil?
Sorry, I'm forcing myself in. No jazz this time. I did want to pick up on a point that Anders had made about what happens when leaders aren't humble, right? They don't want to accept mistakes because, and those leaders have a name, right? That name is Donald Trump. That name is strongman. Right now, more than half the population of the world is led by strongman leaders who claim to have never made a mistake, right? And people like them. So this is a fundamental, I think the fundamental dichotomy here is with populism. And in some ways, populism is, I think, promising the same thing.
Yeah.
Populism is saying, I will give you your popular view, but you have to believe in me. Right? And in some ways, theoretically, collaborative governance is saying, I will give you the space to say your view and work together with me. So that challenge that you laid is a very real challenge because people are attracted to that, strong man on a white horse without a shirt, like Mr. Putin's photographs, right? But this is a political reality of our world. Right? And that means it requires maturity not only from leaders, but from citizens. Right? But the reason I took the mic again is insidiously, the promise of populism is exactly the same. What they are saying to their followers is, we will give you the popular.
Yeah.
Their method is different, right? So again, I'm trying to sort of go to what Gert said. The question here is a much more bigger one in terms of where democracy goes than simply sort of, what to do about some governance question. I will not speak again.
Okay, I think I'm tempted to end this panel because we need to end. But I'm tempted to end it by asking any educational person or whoever in the room who has been involved in one of these kind of programs or reforms, what is a mistake? Can you pick a mistake that you are satisfied about having made it and because of the learning, because of that it brought? Can you pick one? I got you.
Not be humble.
Not to be humble. Not to be humble enough.
Perhaps the mistake most important, or the most important mistake is not be humble and not listen to other actors, to other persons, and think that you have all the time the reason. This is the most important problem on the political system and the public administration system, to manage the democracy.
Okay, thanks for that confession.
Perhaps we feel more comfortable working with people we believe the project than people that don't believe it.
Yeah.
So perhaps in the first moment we start working with them, but we have realizing that it's necessary to work with everybody.
With everybody, yeah. Thank you. Thanks. Markel, you are thinking hard.
I don't think that it's a fault and it's a mistake, but I think that it's not done or to think. We used to think that collaborative governance is a question that will win. It's a strategy that will win.
Yeah.
It's not a good point. because we can have regressions to the previous point of view.
Yeah.
I think that in political strategy, in the political parties, which is Xavier's point, previous point, no? Now the strong leaderships with hierarchical strategies are really the main strategies.
Right.
I think. So we have a problem because if we not achieve results with the collaborative governance, tangible or tangible, I don't know how to say it.
Tangible, yeah.
Tangible regime. Maybe we can go
back
to the past, go back.
Mm-hmm.
You have to win the elections. So collaborative governance is good, but in the medium and long term. But we lead also the short term. So it's a contradiction. I don't know how is the solution of that.
Yeah.
But we live in that contradiction permanently.
Right.
It's a sensation that people now, a lot of people around you think that you are a weak leader. When you go to when you give the step to the collaborative governance.
Right.
So it's
yeah.
And sometimes it is the last point. Sometimes you need the exterior reconnaissance to your effort, because nobody is prophet in his land.
Thank you. Thanks. Okay, so I think with this final point, which is very. Oh, do you want it? No. Okay. So thanks so much to all the panelists for the presentations. Okay, so I'm going to leave the microphone. I'll keep in mind just to introduce you Eider Mendoza, who is the person who is going to. She is the provincial minister for governance of the Gipuzkoa Provincial Council, and she's going to give us some kind of conclusions from this session today. She's going to speak in French, because if you want translation, there's translation there. Yes. Oops.
Je vais lire en français.
I'm going to
Merci beaucoup
speak
pour
French. So thank
votre
you,
invitation.
everyone. Thank you
Je
for your
tiens à remercier
invitation.
à
I would
nouveau
like
le
to
gouvernement
thank
basque et la
the
délégation
government of the Basque Country
basque
and the
évaluée,
Basque delegation to the
auquel
EU,
cette rencontre
thanks to
a eu
whom
lieu.
this meeting has been taking
Et
place.
merci à toutes les
Also, I would
personnes
like to
qui ont
thank all the
participé
people
à
who were involved in this forum.
Toutes vos contributions sont
Your
bienvenues
contributions are
et seront
welcome
prises en compte.
and will be taken into
Je
account.
renouvelle mes
I
remerciements
would like to
parce que
thank
pour nous, le
different
fait de
people again,
pouvoir
because for us, the
présenter
fact that
les
we are
Etorkis
presenting
devant les institutions
Etorkizuna
européennes
Eraikis before the
revêt
European
une
institutions is of
importance
paramount importance.
Etorkizuna Eraikis est un projet
Etorkizuna
localisé dans la
Eraikis is a
province
project
de Gipuzkoa,
situated in Gipuzkoa province, which also deals with problems coming from the entire Western world, starting with the first starting point, the lack of trust towards politicians, increasing lack of trust, and the distance between us and the voters, increasing populism. Also, in spite of its small size, the province of Gipuzkoa is trying to be a laboratory for experimentation where we try to take up all the realities. Now, our purpose is not to act in an isolated bubble. On the contrary, we want to take action in an international framework. And for all of us, This framework is the EU. It is the EU with our motto, think globally, act locally. We do believe that Etorkizuna Eraikis will provide its humble contribution and provide solutions to take up the challenges for the future, which seems very complex. Now, as a consequence, I would like to thank again everyone who has attended, and I hope that these bonds that we have created today will last with time. Now, let's move on with the content of the day. I would like to speak on behalf of the entire Gipuzkoa delegation, insist that we are particularly happy with this event. We are now strengthened thanks to it. Etorkizuna Eraikis is also reinforced. We have the feeling that we got the support from the European Commission in the mouth of the Vice President Barska Shuka. We could also broadcast and disseminate our project in the EU level. We've also taken into account important contributions that will help us improve our project and also give it a better direction. Open governance and collaborative governance is the backbone of our project Etorkizuna Eraikis. Of course, we don't want to limit ourselves to our province. Today's event has enabled us to broaden our contacts. We spoke here about the importance of collaborative governance and about the way to implement it. We have examined the development of collaborative leadership. We've also studied the way of how to go from experiment to institutionalization, how to create trust, how to communicate to get different stakeholders involved. We have also referred to different matters. You spoke about innovation, which is at the heart of everything we do. Innovation, which is social and political. I'd like to define our project Etorkizuna Eraikis as a huge innovation exercise for social innovation, especially. It's a huge exercise because we have reached around 70,000 people involved. It's innovative due to the radical transformation that it's proposing and implemented in our relations with the organized society and the greater public. Now, this innovation also has to be broadened to politicians if we want to be really efficient, especially when it comes to the change we'd like to implement. We claim that the old recipes no longer work, especially when we define the relations between the politicians, the institutions, and the citizens. So we need to innovate. We also need to extend innovation to our culture, our political culture. So in this world, we heard that Etorkizuna Eraikis is working through a think tank, and it deserves particular attention. Now, we can also claim that Etorkizuna Eraikis is a tool that is necessary, which has proved its efficiency and includes a lot of potential for the future. There are strategic challenges that we need to take up with Gipuzkoa. These are the same challenges as for those of Europe. So, demographic challenge, we need to keep talents and attract talents, youth emancipation, sustainability, and the fight against climate change, also justice and economic growth, and the fight against inequalities, but also clear territorial balance. Now, to take up these challenges, we have two options ahead of us. One, we just give up. It means that we stay stuck and inactive, or we get activated. We take action. We pull up our sleeves and look for solutions. Etorkizuna Eraikis is a clear expression of this second option. And with this project, we get all the citizens involved and the entire society to look for solutions. It will be a necessary tool that will give us a list of challenges. Now, the involvement of all the people concerned somehow is important in this project. It is clear that everybody gets involved. Etorkizuna Eraikis represents the future and has a great future ahead. Now, I cannot conclude without thanking you again and propose that you come to our province to discover it and get involved in our project. The doors of Etorkizuna Eraikis and of Gipuzkoa are greatly open to you. We have great and interesting experience in the field of collaborative collaboration and governance, and we'd like to share that with all the people interested in the project. Our ambition is to keep growing, to keep reinforcing the project, to improve it. Now, the better we get with Etorkizuna Eraikis, the stronger we get, the better ready we'll be for the future. We need to close the gap between politicians and the citizens. So our goal is to keep learning, to keep innovating, And I truly believe that all of you here could keep contributing to the project. It will be interesting, of course, for Etorkizuna Eraikis. I truly believe that we will meet again within this framework. Thank you again, everyone. Thank you for your attention. I would like to thank the organizers, and I would like to thank all the people who've been involved in organizing this. Thank you.